Hey guys, for you first-time viewers, my name is David.
And my name is Jenny.
And we are full-time RVers living in our travel trailer back here, and we boondock out in the National Forest and BLM land all the time, pretty much constantly.
Almost exclusively. I think I can count on one hand the times we've been in a campground in the last 3 years.
Yeah, and we know that with current events that are going on in the world today, and campgrounds being closed down, many of you are thinking of trying boondocking for the first time. So we wanted to make a kind of do's and don'ts of boondocking video for you to help you out.
It's incredibly important when you are deciding on a place to boondock that you pick a lot of them. When David and I very first hit the road, we learned very, very quickly that it is important to have not just one camping area picked out, but at least 3. Now, this is really important because if you're camping in an area that is busy, especially if you're planning on arriving there during a weekend, including Fridays, the chance of any one of those camping areas being absolutely packed is actually really high, and you risk not having a campsite available. So, the best way to avoid literally not having a place to camp is picking out multiple locations in an area. So let's say you're wanting to camp around Sedona, Arizona. There's so many different areas to camp. You're going to want to make sure that you have multiple different roads in the area pinned so that you can travel down them, check them out, see which ones are open, especially if you're traveling down on the weekend. And then, worst case scenario, if for some reason all of the camping is full that you have had pinned, you're going to want to at least have some sort of extra backup plan, like a Walmart parking lot or even a Cracker Barrel to overnight in. Now, this could be something that's going to take some getting used to, and that's because for those of you that are used to camping in campgrounds, well, when you're out boondocking in the National Forest or out on BLM land, there are no reservations. You literally cannot call anyone to reserve a campsite, so you have to rely on that site being empty when you arrive.
Our next tip sort of goes off of what Jenny was just saying, and that is, if at all possible, arrive at your camping destination sometime during the week. Avoid arriving on the weekends. This will give you an even higher chance of finding an open campsite. I know that sometimes this isn't possible, especially for those of you, who work Monday through Friday. You might not be able to take Friday off to arrive on a Thursday, but for you full-time RVers out there, this should be a lot easier. Jenny and I do our very best when planning our traveling to make sure that we travel from our current destination to our next destination Monday through Wednesday even. We've even found that Thursdays, for the most part, are more active camping days than Monday through Wednesday.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. I know. Thank you. I love you too. For those of you that have dogs like we do, it's really important that you keep an eye on them when camping in your campsite. Typically, there aren't leash laws for when you're in a campsite with your pets in the National Forest or out on BLM land. Sometimes there are when you're out on trails, but that means that it's really important for you to keep an eye on them in your campsite. Even the area that we're in right now, there are cacti around, and she has stepped on one while here, but the cacti that are really, really scary, and if you don't know what these are, look it up, are called cholla, and I swear, these are just the worst. They are the worst possible cacti. They blow around in the wind, they're super light, and they stick to anything and everything, but they're really hard to pull out. And you definitely don't want your pets to get into some of those, but that's not the only reason. You also have to worry about other animals. Some of you may not know this, but coyote, because they're pack animals, will lead your pet away or your dog away, and then once it's far enough away from camp, they will converge on it and attack. And I would hate to lose this beautiful puppy right here to a pack of coyote. Coyote aren't the only dangerous animals out here though. There are rattlesnakes, there are bears, there are cougar. All of those are really dangerous, so you want to make sure you keep an eye on them. But besides the dangers of an area that you're camping in, there are other dangers. And the reason I'm going to mention this is because we've actually experienced it, so I'm going to give you actual real examples that we have had. We have been camping where we can't see our neighbors, and all of a sudden a dog wanders into our campsite. And we can't approach the dog because the dog won't let us approach it, and we don't know where their owner is. And that is something that is terrifying to me. If Sweetie were to wander away because she hears someone talking off in the distance and I don't know where she is, that would be devastating, especially if they decide that they want her. Look at this pup here though. Who wouldn't want her if she wandered into their campsite? Seriously. So you want to keep an eye on them for that. And then there was one other instance where we had someone camped nearby that we can see, and they just let their dog outside, but their dog really liked our trailer and was laying underneath our trailer, and then we didn't feel comfortable letting Sweetie outside because we didn't know how friendly their dog was. So not only is it for the safety of your dog and for fear of losing your dog, but it's also for the safety of others. You know, the people that are camping near you might not know if your dog is friendly. So it's really important to keep an eye on these massive goobers. You're so dirty. You're so dirty. You need a bath.
If you're brand new to dispersed camping out in the national forests, then this next tip is going to be a big one for you. And that is the roads in the national forest can get pretty sketchy, especially for big rigs. Before you just go charging out into the national forest with your RV, you need to understand that many of the roads in the national forest are not maintained. So, you know, they can be very washboarded, they can be washed out, and they can be rutted. So you really need to have an adventurous side for you to take your RV out into these wild areas. Typically, the main national forest roads that you enter and exit from are pretty well maintained, and you don't have to worry about a lot of this stuff. But if you go down the offshoot roads, the side roads, that's where they can really get sketchy, and a lot of times they will be soft, which can be dangerous for getting stuck. And if it has rained recently or it's snowy there, they can get really muddy, and again, you're at risk of getting stuck. These offshoot roads also tend to be very narrow, sometimes just one lane, and they can also sometimes have very low hanging branches, sometimes even downed trees in front of them, because again, they're not really maintained. And these offshoot roads are where Jenny and I have noticed the best campsites are typically off of, which can be a drag, if you're not adventurous enough to really get out to them. And in that case, it's okay. The main national forest roads are typically pretty nice, and especially if you're in a national forest where they're very well maintained, it's okay to just stick to those and just drive down those main roads, and typically you'll be able to find a campsite off of those.
For those of you that have seen any of my campsite reviews, you know that I almost always recommend to drop your rig before pulling down a road to try and find if the site that I'm reviewing is even open. And there is a very good reason for that. And that is because if you were to pull your rig down most of these national forest roads without scoping it out ahead of time, the chances of you getting stuck and possibly not being able to turn around, or even back out for that matter because of how tight some of the turns might be, is really, really high. And if you get stuck out in the national forest and you don't have signal, you're really screwed, and you're gonna have to walk to signal, try and find someone that can come and pull you out backwards. It's an absolute nightmare that we avoid at all costs. So every time we are coming to a new national forest, I almost always have a campsite of some sort or a location where I know that we're allowed to pull off and park at, and that is where we will drop the rig. We will literally detach the truck from the rig, and then we will drive around and try and find a campsite. There have been quite a few times where we have gotten to a national forest, done exactly that, and there has not been a campsite available. Or the only campsite that is available is down this narrow, windy road that there's no way if our trailer was attached we'd be able to get down there. So you really, really need to keep in mind when getting ready to boondock out somewhere that it's very important that you don't get yourself stuck.
When it comes to dispersed camping in the national forest, Google Maps is your best friend. What we do before we head on out is we get onto Google Maps and we just kind of check out some of the national forest roads on satellite view, and that gives us a really good idea if the roads are passable, and you can also find cleared out areas that you can potentially camp in. So yeah, we just literally scroll down, we just follow those roads and we find these sites and we're like, okay, this road looks good and there are plenty of cleared spots off there. We are most likely going to be able to find camping. And what you're also going to want to do is before you head out into the national forest, you're definitely going to want to download offline Google Maps of those roads that you plan to camp off of. Cellular signal out here is extremely hit or miss, especially if you have big hills like the ones around our campsite right now. Thankfully, this site that we're in has very strong cell signal somehow, because we're really far into the national forest, but somehow we have signal. However, just a half mile up the road, and for as far up that road as we've explored, complete dead zone. So, if we were planning on camping that way, we would really be relying on these offline Google Maps just to know where the heck we are and to keep tabs on where we are as we explore deeper into the forest. However, if you are more old school and you like paper, hard copy maps, then you can definitely go to the ranger station for whatever national forest district you plan on camping in, and they typically have very large fold out maps that, we've got some really big ones that will specify what roads you can and can't camp off of. They also say if it's a seasonal road that is closed, and typically they also designate what roads are maintained and what roads are dirt unmaintained, so forth. So if you do go to the ranger station to find these maps, you're going to want to ask them for their motor vehicle use map. And that just means a map of the areas that you're allowed to drive a motor vehicle on. And you can also get onto the National Forest website, and you can typically download a PDF map of the various districts for the National Forest as well.
I know that there are a ton of you out there that when you go camping, you love to have s'mores over a fire, or you love to socialize around a campfire, and that's great. We love it just as much as the next person. However, if you're going to be staying in a national forest or out on BLM land and there are fire restrictions or possible fire restrictions, it's important, very, very important, for you to know what those fire restrictions are. If you have a fire or you are caught having a fire, and the fire restrictions mean that you're not allowed to have a fire during that time, you will incur a very heavy fine. These fire restrictions are super easy. You literally just have to call the ranger district for wherever you're going to be camping. If you're going to be camping in a national forest, you just contact the ranger district in charge of the national forest. They can tell you all the fire restrictions. If you're going to be camping on BLM land, you just contact the BLM ranger district in the nearest town, and they should be able to tell you what the fire restrictions are for there as well. And when you call them, they will also give you extra tidbits of information. We have found out that there are some national forest campsites that we have stayed in where there's a stone fire ring that someone has made, but you're not actually allowed to have a fire in it, because the rules for that national forest is you're only allowed to have a fire in a metal fire grate that the national forest has put in a campsite. So there are all kinds of things that you can learn by calling the ranger district, and that way you can know more information about all the fire restrictions and all the ways that you're allowed to have a fire. You have to have water, a bucket, and a shovel in order to put your fire out. And we have seen some pretty elaborate instructions on how to put a fire out when you're out at a campsite. One of them being that you dump water on the fire, then you use your shovel to stir it around in order to get all the coals nice and wet. You wait for it to dry, and then you also bury it. I mean, that's a lot to know about a fire, or how to put a fire out just to stay in a national forest.
This next tip should be obvious, but unfortunately for some people, it's not. And that is to be courteous to anyone that is camping near you. Now, this isn't really that big of a deal if you're in a really private site like this one that we're camping in right now, where there are trees really separating you from any other nearby site. But if you're especially camping in the deserts of the American Southwest, where you can see the other people that are camping by you, or you're in a group camping site, you just need to be courteous to them as far as noise goes, especially at night and in the morning. When you're dispersed camping, there aren't any generator hours, so technically you are allowed to run a generator literally 24/7, but if there's someone camping near you, I would say, within 500 feet or so, then you should really stick to the standard generator hours that you find at campgrounds. If for whatever reason you need to run a generator really early in the morning or later at night, or maybe even all night, like let's say you have a CPAP machine that needs to be powered, then just know that you should probably camp further away from everyone. You don't have to be extremely far away, especially if you have an inverter generator, which tend to be pretty quiet, but just, keep that in mind and be courteous to your fellow campers, and that will just make you a better camper in general.
The most important thing you need to understand about boondocking, especially in a campsite like this one, is that these are all first come, first serve. That means that even if a campsite looks like it's large enough for 2 rigs to fit in, that doesn't mean that the person that is already camped there when you arrive wants you to camp with them. Because it's first come, first serve, and they were there first, the entire campsite is theirs. If this is the absolute last campsite in the entire area, and it's the only one left that you can fit in, then it's important that you ask if you can stay there. Again, because it is already occupied, they don't have any obligation to share that campsite with you. Places like national forests are huge, and there is camping everywhere. You just have to know how to find it and where to look. What we found is the easiest way to find campsites once we arrive to a national forest we want to stay in is we drop the rig in the closest campsite that is open, we detach the truck from it, and we just drive. And we will go down every single road that we can find until we find an open campsite. And that is one of the easiest ways to find a campsite in a national forest, but I also have a very detailed video explaining on how I find free campsites, and I can show you what kind of research I do beforehand while I'm looking for a national forest or area to stay in, and that video will be linked up here, so if you wanted to check it out, you can. And that's what we call dispersed camping. It is not staying in a campground in a national forest. Now, national forests all over the place do have campgrounds. Even the one we're staying in right now, there are campgrounds that we could have booked in order to camp in them, but we wanted to dispersed camp. Dispersed camping in a single campsite like the one we're camped in right now is actually different than camping in a group camping area like you can find in Lake Havasu. At Lake Havasu, the different camping areas are typically these big open areas where there's just a ton of RVs packed into one spot, and that's where everyone camps at. And if you're wanting something more social than dispersed camping where you're out here in the middle of nowhere with nobody around, then that is something that is much easier to find, and they're typically easier to get to for some big rigs as well.
And the last thing we've got for you guys is just that we ask you to pack out what you pack in. And that basically means don't leave any trash behind at your campsite. These public lands are gorgeous, and we all come out here so that we can better connect with nature. And it's just really unfortunate when we arrive at a campsite and there's broken glass all over the place, or there are beer bottles, cans, pop cans, or plastic bags left behind from other people that just were not courteous enough to take that trash back out with them. We love our public lands, and we hope that you do too. And if you want to take care of them as well, then do what we do. And that's before we leave a campsite, we make sure to take a plastic trash bag out with us, and we just walk around with gloves on, and we just pick up the trash that is around our campsite. It only takes us about 15 to 20 minutes to clean up a campsite, and it feels really good knowing that we are leaving the area better and cleaner and nicer than it was when we first arrived. Unfortunately, there are people that are going to come out here and just trash the place because they just don't care about the public lands like you and I do. However, it's up to us then to unfortunately clean up after them, even though, none of us want to do that. But, to keep these areas pristine, someone's got to do it. The sad reality is that the National Forest and the BLM will shut down camping areas if people just neglect them and trash them. So if you want to ensure that a camping area that you really like stays open forever, just take care of it.
Those are not all of the do's and don'ts of boondocking. Those aren't all of the examples of things that can go wrong or things that you should or shouldn't do when out boondocking. It literally just boils down to using common sense and being courteous to your neighbors and the land that you're staying on. And it's pretty much that simple. And we hope that you guys, if you're coming out to enjoy boondocking and wild camping or dry camping or whatever you want to call it, or whatever it's called near you, I hope that you truly enjoy it like we do. It really is our favorite way to live.
Yep, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye. Sweetie girl, say bye.
Ooh.